This show just doesn't miss, does it? Visually speaking, of course. As much as certain brain-dead individuals on Twitter would like you to think otherwise, this show is mostly perfect from a visual point of view, and that take applies to every single episode, including this one. I'll break down the new "will be old in a couple of days because I'm late" episode of Chainsaw Man. This episode was directed by Takahiro Kaneko and storyboarded by Hironori Tanaka, who also served as an animation director. Just like every other episode, this one looked stunning. Let's break down the visuals, starting with the storyboards, which were of course done by Hironori Tanaka. And similar to episode 3, which was also storyboarded by him, it had some top-notch camera work. The non-existent camera rotates, pans, and moves in a variety of ways, accentuating the impact and adding to the dynamic nature of this episode. Even when the amount of camera movement was less, the shot compositions allowed for a very cinematic look. This episode was mostly action-oriented, and the action storyboards were really good. They were chaotic and all over the place in a good way. They were a bit hard to follow at times, however, it wasn't disorienting. As for the general artwork, everything was stunning to look at, even more so thanks to the massive amounts of corrections done by Hironori Tanaka. His artwork has such a distinct and easily recognizable style to it. Tanaka's fingerprints were all over this episode, and thanks to that, the artwork stood out even more. In a good way, of course. Those eerily realistic dead faces and the absurd amount of detail amongst other things. It was perfect. Moving on to the actual animation, the first thing we see is what happened at the end of the previous episode. However, it's not just a standard recap. Not only is it reanimated, it's re-storyboarded. They literally redid the whole scene from scratch, mostly. That's effort. From that point on, we jump right into the action, and let me mention something right at the start. The transitioning between the 3D and 2D for both Denji and Katana Man were seamless. Of course, you can figure out what is CGI and what isn't if you look close enough and if you know what to look for. But at this point, who cares really? It looks fine. You can go cry in the comments. I won't make mention of the CGI every time it's on screen. I don't see the need. Right off the bat, we get this gorgeous shot of Denji and this slightly less gorgeous shot of Katana Man. The wide shot, however, doesn't look the best. It's not Eren and Annie facing off, let's put it that way. The chainsaw close-ups always look amazing though. Denji and his erratic movements are always a joy to look at. This cut was animated by Kaito Tomioka. The smears on Denji as well as the sparks look stunning. The shot starts off normally, then zooms in and becomes an extreme close-up, and then zooms out again, giving the whole scene a very dynamic feel. Speaking of dynamic, remember what I said about the camera work? Well, it really shines there. The shot starts with a front profile of Denji, rotates all the way to his back, and then zooms in over his shoulder. The next cut also rotates a bit. A little nitpick here, I wish this whole sequence was a single cut instead of two. More wild Denji close-ups leading to that money shot. Some static shots later, we get even more action, the first 4 seconds of which is animated by Yen BM. It's some good old sword fighting with a lot of smears. Also, I love how Denji's attacks are haphazard and chaotic, while Katana Man is a lot more graceful with his strikes. Some really nice debris animation follows. I really love this one attack in particular. It's one move, but it's shown using 4 different cuts, and the energy and impact flows between these cuts seamlessly. I really like this perspective shot in particular. It features some good looking background animation as well as some really good foreshortening. Also, this is the closest Chainsaw Man has come to using a still frame in an action scene. Of course, this isn't a still, but it's presented like one. This whole sequence and a few cuts that follow are done by Hayato Kurosaki, who is this show's resident debris and effects man. Naturally, his cuts here have a lot of debris flying around, and trust me, that makes things complicated. You can also find some amazing background animation, wild smears, and a somewhat first-person shot. Again, the entire fight had a lot of smoke and debris flying around, which is really impressive from an animation point of view. More smears leads us to this really dynamic sequence. The camera rotates, goes underneath the characters and rotates some more. This adds to the chaotic feel. The next few shots are not exactly out of this world from an animation point of view, but Hironori Tanaka's heavy corrections make them special. The incredible amount of detail, the distinct line work, Tanaka's artwork is really something special. This episode really got across the terrifying part of Makima really well. She's not a full-blown psychopath as of right now, but you can tell that something isn't quite right with her. That's all I'll say, I'm not going to spoil anything. Also, proper character acting animation for these random background characters, because why not? You know the drill by now. Also, this might be the most technically impressive scene in the entire episode. The movement is incredibly lifelike, and the heavy Tanaka corrections look amazing. The level of detail here is unreal. Also, they didn't have to animate this guy pushing somebody out of the way. It wasn't even a manga panel. They really didn't have to animate this, but they did it anyway. When is the last time you saw an action anime with character acting this good? The effects animation is so good you almost forget that people are literally exploding. Speaking of people exploding, the whole shrine sequence is really cinematic, and the uncanny factor is quite strong here. Also, the amazing hand animation, because why not? We get some more Tanaka corrections, I wonder if he sleeps, ever. Some really nice camera work leads us to the final action sequence, which is animated by Koki Fujimoto with Tanaka corrections. The sequence starts with some really good looking character acting on Sawatari's face, followed by some gorgeous 2D background animation. The snake hair has those signature inky smears, which gets across the speed really well. Kobeni jumps and runs on top of the snake. Every little movement she makes is accompanied by smears, which makes everything flow naturally. Also, there's some motion blur thrown in, which makes it all feel even more natural. The background animation is really impressive throughout this entire sequence. All in all, it was an extremely impressive scene. As I previously mentioned, the CGI was really well integrated into this episode, better than any other episode so far. The compositing was on point, especially during the shrine scenes. The art direction for this episode was the best so far in my opinion. The amazing perspectives accompanied by the lighting created this incredible aesthetic that this episode needed. Of course, people have plenty of complaints, mostly about the CGI. Trying to defend the 3D work for this show is a lost cause at this point. When episode 1 used CGI, it was already phenomenal. Then episode 3 used it and it was even better, and now episode 9 has stepped up the quality yet again. The previous episode and this one had some minor issues with the key animation. It was inevitable really, but still this episode looked nearly perfect. So that was it. Did you like this episode? Do you dislike the CGI? Comment down below. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and until next time.